Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you joining us tonight. I am Pastor Tommy McMurtry from Liberty Baptist. Make sure you let me know in the live chat if everything's all good, if our audio is all clear, if there's any technical difficulties. Otherwise, we're just going to sit here talking, looking at the camera. I'm not able to see what's going on over there, but that will help me out. But I am joined today in person with Pastor Jay Griggs of the Faith Baptist Church in Eureka. And if you'd like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and tell everybody a little bit about your church and your ministry.
Okay, my name is Jay Griggs, and I'm the pastor of Faith Baptist Church in Eureka, Illinois. We have been there about a year and a half, and prior to that, I pastored down in Louisiana, started a church down there. But in October 21, I became the pastor of Faith Baptist, and really enjoying it, just plugging away, winning souls, seeing lives change. My wife and I, we have been married almost 23 years, have 8 children, ages 21 to 2 years old, 6 boys, 2 girls, and 1 on the way. We are uncertain as far as which gender it will be. It will be either or, just to clarify.
Right. You do have to clarify that these days.
But we won't be able to find out here until a handful of weeks from now. But
okay. So basically, Pastor Griggs, he's kind of like the Bizarro version of me, Bizarro from Superman.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so we both have 8 kids, but he's got 6 boys, 2 girls, where I've got 2 boys, 6 girls. So we're like the opposite on everything. So.
Yeah, we're kind of opposite on doctrine too, but we're not going to get into that.
We're not going to talk about that. Nobody hold Pastor Griggs accountable for any of my weird issues, and vice versa. We're friends. We've known each other for a long time. I don't even know where we met. I think
probably at football camp.
Probably. Yeah.
Either that, or obviously through your father.
Right.
And man, I love your dad, and just a great teacher in college.
Yeah, I think football camp's probably where we got to know each other. Mm-hmm. I just feel like I've kind of always known who you were, at least for a long time.
But we weren't really talkative
right.
or anything of that nature. That was me probably way back when. The way I used to think it is like I have my wife and my children. I don't need any friends. And I used to be of the mindset of, I don't hate a particular group of people. I just hate everybody other than my wife or kids, because that's all I need. But
right.
Of course, God changed me and helped me a lot with that.
Yeah, and Pastor Griggs was pastoring in Louisiana for a long time, but in the last couple of years is when we've gotten closer to each other since you moved back to Illinois and pastoring not super far from here, hour and a half. Hour, how long did it take you guys to get down here?
About an hour and a half.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so definitely enjoy the fellowship and appreciate, his family, testimony, and the church there. And so we've been talking about doing a discussion like this. I try to, as much as I can, have different discussions with other pastors on kind of just IFB-related subjects. That's kind of how I categorize these things, just IFB-type subjects. And what we want to talk about tonight that I think is really important and something in fact, I'm kind of hoping maybe to talk to a couple other pastors kind of about this same subject too, because I think just hearing other people's stories and perspective on this would be really good, because when it comes to going into the ministry and what it takes to be in the ministry, a lot of people, obviously have that desire, and it is a good work, but there are requirements in the Bible for a reason. And those requirements are there because not just anybody can do it. And
right.
It's something that, and I think a lot of people don't realize what they're getting into when they get into the ministry. And
especially when it comes to pastoring,
right.
For example, they believe that pastoring is just preaching.
Yeah,
this is something I talk to our people about all the time. Actually, preaching is the easiest part, I believe, as far as pastoring. Down south where I used to live at, they didn't quite understand the difference between a pastor and a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And, me, I am the type of person that pastors my flock, not just preaches to my flock. And but anyway, for those that are potentially seeking the ministry, the most important qualification is a calling.
And I agree with that. In fact, I wanted to talk about that too. Let's go ahead and talk about that for a little bit, because I do hear a lot of kind of arguing back and forth. You hear a lot of different opinions about the calling and the necessity of the call. And when people ask me that question, do you believe that a guy needs to be called? Well, I think you do have to kind of define that a little bit, because not everybody means the same thing. But for sure, I do think it needs to be a calling on your life. And I think there's a reason for that too, because when it comes to the ministry, there's some major challenges to it. And I do believe the draw a lot of people have towards pastoring, maybe being in the ministry, being a preacher, there are some things that on the surface can have kind of a carnal appeal to it. People like the idea of, being in leadership, and having a following or whatever. But at the same time, when you actually get into it and you start facing the challenges and fighting some of the battles that are part of it,
right?
If it's not a calling on your life, if it's something that you're doing for some kind of selfish reason, you are going to flop out, because there are rewards for sure. We'll talk about that.
Yep.
But there's some real challenges, and if it is not something that is a calling, and so for me, I guess when I'm talking about a calling, it's just like, I know this is something the Lord wants me to do. I feel like it's something I've been made for. It's God's will for my life. And, and I feel like if I were to ever quit, I'd be like Jeremiah, where it's like a fire in my bones. I'd have to do something, I just have to do it. Woe is me if I preach not the gospel.
Right.
And so while it's very hard sometimes, and there's some real challenges, I can't imagine not doing it either. And so, I do think it's very important, because, and so I like what Paul said in 1 Timothy 1:12. He said, "And I thank Christ Jesus our Lord, who hath enabled me, for he hath counted me faithful, putting me into the ministry." And the ministry is a privilege to be able to serve in the ministry, but it's not something for everybody. He said he counted me faithful. That's why he put him in there. And you are going to have to be faithful, because there are going to be trials. There's going to be difficulties. And so let's talk about just some of the challenges and the rewards that, go with it. So, I mean, what would you say we could probably sit here all night having a great discussion.
We could. I wanted to say this. You made that comment about privilege, privilege being in the ministry. A lot of people fail to forget that even though it is a great privilege, it also has great responsibility.
Right.
It's a burden, a load that you are going to have to carry all of the time. Mm-hmm. And for someone to have the mindset of, hey, man, I get to pastor church and stand behind the pulpit and scream and rip face and preach the devil out of people and all that different things. That's great, and it has its time and place. And on that note, you're not going to build your church if all you're doing is just screaming, ripping, and preaching the devil out of people every single service. And the Bible talks about how the pastor is supposed to reprove, rebuke, exhort with what?
All long suffering
and
doctrine.
Exactly. The well-balanced pastor. And if all you're doing is reproving, you're not balanced. If all you're doing is rebuking, you're not balanced. The balance of the three.
Well,
and the challenge, we were talking about some of the challenges I as pastor have personally, finding that balance, just like I as a father. If we raise our children, all we're doing is just dropping the hammer, reproving, rebuking, no exhortation. I'm going to tell you, you will end up developing a child that is very insecure and also probably very bitter how you raise them. But anyway, part of the challenge personally for me is making sure that I am very balanced in regard to that, reproving, rebuking, exhorting with all long-suffering and doctrine, and making sure that my motives are right. Every sermon that I preach, I always check myself first. And sometimes I even preach sermons to myself.
Oh, yeah.
And people seem to forget that. Sometimes people come to me, were you preaching at me in that sermon? I was like, no. But hey, if it applies, it applies. A lot of times I'm preaching myself. Sometimes I'm preaching to a specific group of people. I would never say that I've already singled out one individual person and say, I'm going to preach this whole sermon for him or for her. But challenges, making sure your own heart is right with the Lord before you get behind that sacred desk and you preach the word of God.
Well, and you mentioned the long suffering too, because one thing that, whenever you're planning on going into the ministry, one thing we forget to factor in is just opposition and the fact that people aren't going to be completely obedient. And it's weird because, we've got this Bible right here, we've got
this is my Bible.
Yes.
You can touch it if you want to.
I'm assuming it's a King James too, right?
It is. King James.
And we believe it's authoritative. It's the final authority. It's perfect. It's the word of God. Yet you find out you can get up and you can, prove beyond any shadow of a doubt the point that you're trying to make, but people don't always listen.
No.
It's like no matter how much proof you show them, it still doesn't change their mind. And it's like we do. You think, man, I've learned all this Bible. I've studied all this stuff. I know the answers. I know how to get people saved. I know how to show the truth about this doctrine and that doctrine. And then you go and you preach it. And then what happens? People come at you and they throw you all these curveballs and questions you never even thought of. And they're like far from convinced. And you're just like, what in the world? It should have been easy. It was easy for me to come around on this doctrine. Why can't I win these people over? But people don't always listen.
Right. And you, by the way, you'll never reach this place whenever it comes to Bible knowledge that you've arrived. You know everything that you need to know about the Word of God. It's amazing thing about that book is right when you think that you got things figured out, God reveals to you, hey, maybe you might be wrong about this. Maybe you might be wrong about this philosophy of yours or what you believed in the past or different things of that nature. Now, of course, God doesn't change, but as you look at line upon line, precept upon precept, and how things harmonize with each other, you're just like, oh, you know what? Maybe I just base this off principle, not necessarily what I saw in the Scripture. You can see it, and it comes alive. But going back to what you were saying about long suffering, man, you got to be long suffering with people. You were going down a path which I thought was really, really good. You were talking about knowing your Bible and knowing doctrine and preaching it straight and true. But if the people that you are preaching to don't believe you care about them, they're not going to listen to you anyway. There's the old phrase, people don't care how much you know, but they want to know how much you care. And that's absolutely true. I've seen this happen time and time again where people just get to know you or get to know somebody, and you could have a guest preacher in. And if he's just, hey, that's all he wants to do is yell and scream at everybody, which there is a time and place for that, but he never expresses any care or concern about. So they're going to write, what does he know about me? What does he know about my life? How is he going to, of course, this is truth. This is great, but, it's almost like, so I have 8 children, soon to be 9. You have 8 children, right? Not soon to be 9.
No.
But you think about this, pastoring a church is very similar to raising our children to some degree. And I'm not saying that the people we have in our church are children, but what are grown-ups? They're just grown-up children. Each one of our children are distinctively similar, but they're also distinctively different. And in church, with as many children as we have, you ever have fussing, fighting, knockdown, drag out, and people not getting along? The temperature's too hot, temperature's too cold. This person's picking on me. This person's taking from me. This person, and in church, you have all these different personalities of all these different coming from different walks of life. If the temperature's 63, someone's going to be upset. If the temperature's 65, somebody's going to be upset. Maybe you weren't polished enough in your statement and you said it in a more brash way. You offended some people, but then there's a group of people that said, man, that's great. And you didn't mean anything by it anyway. You just made a statement. So you've got to challenge as pastors, get all these people from all these walks of life, whether if they grew up in a rough environment or if they grew up in a Christian home, and getting them all to come together corporately, not only to fellowship with each other, to worship and through song, and then sit down and hear preaching, under the same roof, and then after it's done, there's some fellowshipping, more fellowshipping or whatever, and for them to all get along, man, I tell you what, if you can get them all along, it's the biggest challenging unity
Yes.
and harmony.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing too. And when you're the pastor, typically, you know your flock, you know the people that are there, and so, when you've spent time at people's house and getting their background and hearing their story, you understand why they are where they're at spiritually, where there's other people in the church haven't got to know them yet, and a lot of times they can be very impatient with them, and you do. And when you get up and preach, you're trying to preach to the whole congregation. You're trying to give, and so some people might need some real basic milk of the word stuff, while other people might be wanting some meat. And and as far as how you say it too, you're trying to you got to be sensitive to the fact that if you have newer people in the church that don't know you yet, that don't know you care, you might have to be careful how you say it. Where you got other people, they want to see you foam at the mouth. They want to watch you go crazy. And it's funny that you'd mentioned that too, because when we started the church, I always felt like I told it straight and everything too. But at the same time, I didn't come out of the gate just foaming at the mouth. I was like, these people, I was taught the same thing, that people have to know how much you care first. But I remember one of the things that was funny is sometimes when I would have guest speakers in, how people would get offended by how they preach. And it's like, I say way meaner things than that all the time. But the problem was, and while I knew that individual, and I know they're loving and caring, and that's just kind of their way and how they preach, and all, these people didn't know that. And and that was when I realized that before you put on too big of a show with that stuff, you got to make sure people know who's talking. And so, like, as parents, some of the stuff we tell our kids sometimes, most parents practically threaten to kill their kids on a regular basis. I brought you into the world, I can take you out of the world, right?
I'm going to take you home, and I'm going to half kill you, boy.
And those are the things you say, but at the same time too, while your kids hear those great threats, they also understand that just means a spanking or something,
right? Which
doesn't excite them, but they get it, and they also know mommy and daddy loves them. So we can get away with saying all that kind of stuff, and it is important to know your people, to know who you're talking to. And I know one of the things too, talking about long suffering and doctrine, I remember one of the things that was really discouraging for me. I think we've been going for, I could be wrong, it was a long time ago, but I think we probably going for close to 2 years. And I remember there was some people, they had been coming to the church for a long time. And I made it crystal clear from the time we started the church, we are a King James only church. I felt like I harped on it all the time. We're King James, King James. And I remember I did a whole message specifically about, King James, and I was showing all these examples of differences and versions and all that. And I remember these people came up to me after church, and they're like, man, that was so good. I had no idea that, we were getting ready to start reading through our Bibles together again, and we just went and bought some new ones, and we had gotten NIVs, and now I guess we got to take them back and get King James, and I was glad that they received it well, but I'm like, so you guys bought NIVs last week? I was like, you've been here all this time and you didn't know? and I kept asking myself, did I never talk about this? I think I talked about this. And you know what I found out early on pastoring is that just because you cover something doesn't mean everybody gets it.
Right.
Because sometimes we do a bad job teaching. Sometimes people don't pay attention.
You just don't know what somebody was dealing with that week.
Exactly.
And they, by the way, those people should actually reciprocate the same mentality whenever it comes to you personally. They have no idea what a pastor dealt with that weekend or that week or whatever. So exercise some long suffering on your part as well. But, I was thinking about what you're saying. Some people think that you get up there and preach and you preach everything. Preach on everything every time. Well, you wouldn't have the time to do that.
Can't be done.
And you ever meet those people or come across? I mean, every time they get up to preach, they want to preach on everything they know every time. And, I mean, it's an hour and a half, it's an hour and 50 minutes. It's, I'll never forget first time I got to preach for a church service. I was 18, almost 19 years old, been saved about a year. Preacher said, "Hey, why don't you preach for Sunday evening service?" I thought, man, what am I going to preach? I preached on everything, man. I preached on everything. I mean, I had ladies stand up that weren't dressed right, and I started preaching on them. Here, I preached for an hour and 50 minutes on everything. Bad music, bad dress, compromising, young, zealous, on fire, asking people, how many of y'all are going to be with us soul winning on Thursday night? Raise your hand. And I said, if your hand is raised, stand up. And then I spent 20 minutes just preaching on the people sitting in their chairs, young.
Man.
And I'll never forget the conversation I had with my pastor after that. But he's like, hey, I appreciate your zeal, your excitement. You're going to run past heaven, blah, blah, blah. You can't run everybody off every time. You got to extra. And I was just like, woo, going to charge hell with a water gun, right? And, of course, anyway.
Yeah, no, I remember when I was an assistant pastor, I had a lot of preaching opportunities. I had a teen class, and I'd preach a lot of services, but it wasn't real regular, so there was always a lot that I wanted to cover. Yeah. And I do remember when I started pastoring, I remember just thinking, this is awesome. I can actually take my time on a subject. I can actually preach a series on a subject, and it was nice when I was able to back off and not try to let everybody know everything I know in one sermon, just kind of give a little bit at a time. But that was fun.
Believe it or not, the first year that I pastored, I'd preach 20 minutes and shut it down.
Oh, wow.
20 minutes. I had a timer. 20 minutes. It didn't matter what point I was in. All right, folks, we're going to have invitation. I'm going to shut it down. Or first year, and then it taught me how to go through like series. Mm-hmm. So I'm real big into series. I like to do series Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday morning. I like to do series. And I'll do a book of the Bible Sunday night, a book of the Bible Wednesday night, and I'll do through a book of the Bible Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And I'll develop series, just series. And that way it was just like, okay, there's plenty to preach. Good night. I'll never forget being in a pastor's office one Sunday night. It was before church, and it was like 5:30. So church was going to start in 30 minutes. He's just like, man, I don't know what to preach. I don't have anything to preach. And I'm like, there's 66 books in here. How many thousands of verses? How many thousands? And you don't know what to preach? You have nothing to preach? There's plenty in the book to preach.
He hasn't been reading his Bible if he doesn't have anything to preach.
I'm sitting there thinking, my problem is I have too much to preach.
I know.
And I have to harness myself down just to say, man, or I'll be doing my devotionals and I'll have a thought and I'll write it down. I'm like, man, that's great. And then I like to come up with points from the scripture, alliterated points oftentimes, and then I will write it down. I'm like, man, that'll preach. I have to file that one away for later and then develop it.
Right.
But my problem is, personally, sometimes there's so much to preach. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we're going to the challenges.
Well,
okay?
yeah.
The challenges and the rewards.
Right. And so the rewards, I do think getting a chance to preach, that is one of the rewarding things. That's a good part, getting up, preaching a sermon. Now, I will say, sometimes it's not fun.
No. And I've had to preach those sermons.
Yeah.
And we talked about it. Brother Hiles said, do not run around screaming you have an atom bomb in your closet. Every now and then, take them to the closet and open the door. Mm-hmm. If everything's important, nothing's important. If all you're doing is screaming and yelling, then it becomes white noise. And the messages, I mean, honestly, there have been times. Now, let me say this: I get nervous every time I preach. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get shaky. I get butterflies in my stomach every time I preach. Every time, Tommy. Mm-hmm. I'm not just saying that. Every time, it's a privilege. It's an honor. Mm-hmm. It comes with great responsibility to stand at that sacred desk and preach. So I get nervous. But whenever it comes to those messages where I have to address something specific in the church. Mm-hmm. And I got to take him to the closet door, open it up, and show him, hey, there's an atom bomb right here waiting for you if this doesn't get fixed. Those are the sermons where I'm just like, oh. And usually on those sermons are the sermons, I don't even have an outline. I just open up the Word of God, and I just let it preach itself. I think the last time I had done that, I actually had to do that about a month and a half ago at our church, and it wasn't fun. I didn't like to do it, but I had to draw a line in the sand, let people know where I stand, and I had to say, who's on the Lord's side, basically. The rewards, we were talking about the rewards. The rewards you talked about is preaching. You know what the reward is? Is seeing them accept the preaching.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've seen it to where I know I know for a fact, and it's not like I developed this whole message just for them. I know for a fact there's several people in church that are struggling with something that I am preaching on. This particular subject, this particular sin, this particular weight, whatever the situation is. I know it, I preach it, and then I see them respond to it. You heard that message I preach on, buy the truth and sell it not. These are the people that bought the truth, that set aside, they relinquish their personal thoughts, feelings, ideologies, et cetera, and they say, okay, I'm going to set all that aside for the truth, and I'm going to submit myself to that truth. And then when they do, the Bible says, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear my children walk in truth, right? So that is the greatest reward, is seeing those people hear the preaching, set aside whatever they believe, and say, I'm going to accept and embrace this truth and walk in it.
Right.
And when they walk in that truth, it's a very rewarding thing, not only for them, but for us to say, they got it.
Right. Yeah, because, again, while we enjoy preaching, even if you get up and you preach this, eloquent, beautifully outlined,
wax an elephant.
Yeah, biblically accurate sermon, but yet then the people in your church, their marriages are falling apart, their homes are a wreck, then it's just like, what's the point? And if the people in your church are struggling, they're just not doing well as Christians, that puts a burden on you as a pastor, and you kind of feel like you failed in that situation, and that's a great burden. But again, when it goes the other way, when it's like, man, hey, this preaching is helping. These people are learning, they're getting their life in order. Like John said, no greater joy than to hear my children walk in truth. And so the truth is, one thing I used to tell the teenagers when I was youth director all the time, one of your goals as a teenager that you could say is a selfish goal, but it's not, is that you should have this goal, I want to make my parents happy. And here's why. Because your parents' happiness, or your happiness, is the key to their happiness. And that's what parents want for their kids. And and if your pastor is happy, that's probably because you're doing good. Pastors don't want to, see their people getting divorced. They don't want to see their kids rebelling. They don't want to hear, these terrible stories. We're there if it happens, but at the same time, that's not what we want to see. And it hurts when that kind of thing happens.
It does.
And if you find out people are in all kinds of sin and everything. And so, yes, with those challenges, or with those potential rewards, it could potentially go the other way too. And it doesn't always go the way you want, and it can be a real burden. But it's always exciting seeing people saved. It's exciting seeing people's lives changed, and to know you had some small part in that is very rewarding. And especially too, if you are living by faith and take into consideration, or you actually are more concerned about heavenly rewards than earthly rewards.
Right. There's a phrase that, we don't do what we do for the income. We do it for the outcome. Going back to what you were saying, part of the challenges that you have, and I was thinking about this, a lot of people in your church don't realize the burden that you carry as pastor. And that doesn't just mean the burden of making sure the light stays on, the burden of what do I got to preach, or burden of, making sure the bathrooms are clean. We're talking about, people fail to forget that you may carry your own burden, but the pastor carries your burden and his burden. That's what he does.
Yeah.
For those that are considering going into the ministry, maybe even to pastor, just think about it like this. Anytime I go on vacation, I have to spend a few days to just get adjusted to, okay, we're on vacation, so we get to go on vacation. I haven't gone on a vacation in a few years. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, it was just maybe for 4 or 5 years. And I think that's vitally important. And going back to the family, you know. And by the way, your family, if you are considering pastoring, this is vitally important that you have a strong relationship with your spouse and your children, because they can disqualify you. Mm-hmm. They can.
Absolutely.
And if you lose them, you might as well just turn in your keys, resign the ministry. This is extremely important. Mm-hmm. So, and we're going to get to that down the road. But you know, there are challenges that come up. We don't do it for the income. We do it for the outcome.
Right.
There have been times where I've had to work 60 hours a week, you know, working a secular job. In the hot summer heat of Louisiana, under houses, crawl spaces, on top of roofs. I mean, I've done a lot of different things. We started our church. We planted a church. We were given a building. Praise the Lord for it. We were given a building. We didn't have to pay anything for the building. A property. Here's your church. You want to start a church? There you go. The church that was in existence, they had church one Sunday. They shut the doors. I remember going into that church. It was really interesting. It was like they had church one last time. You know, you go in the Sunday school classrooms, and there's little coloring books that look like they were colored by little kids. The crowns were still on the desk, and I mean, it's kind of eerie in there. It looks like they had church one last time and locked the doors.
Wow. And
so we were given that building. We did work on it, and then we started the church. But, you know, we didn't go out and get support, and I'm not opposed to that. What's amazing to me is that I've come across a lot of people. They won't start a church unless they raise this much support. Well, if God called you to do it, he's going to enable you to do it, regardless how much support comes in. And by the way, if you are afraid to work a job and pastor a church, then you probably don't need to be pastoring a church. I could show you in Scripture where Paul did that.
Yep.
You know, many of these people. And Paul used the ministry of other churches, took up offerings to support church. And, you know, I love reading where Paul, I mean, you could tell he's getting a little irritated by people accusing him.
Right.
Well,
I like how he said, I robbed other churches, too, when
right.
he was talking about
He held me up, stick him off, you know. But it's, you know, we don't do this. And by the way, I do not believe that a young man, you know, just newly married, doesn't even have children. Mm-hmm. You know, he doesn't need to go and pastor church 300 people, 400 people, however, 100 people. Mm-hmm. Okay? He needs to sit under a man that's pastoring, you know, and maybe even have some children. You know, I'm not so this isn't a hill I'm going to go and die on where someone has to have children to pastor church. Mm-hmm. Okay? I'm not going to go to that hill and die on it. If that's your opinion, that's your view, that's fine. That's fine. But I believe that it would help him in his ministry. If he was, you know, if he did have children, it would enlighten him tremendously on his children. But his children and his wife are assets to it. But going back to the income situation, you're not going to go. So if that's the case, you have no business going to a church like that right out of Bible college or right out of the whatever form you choose to go to, you know, regarding how you're getting trained or taught as a young man. But then at the same time, you may have to work a job. So if you want to start a church, you're going to have to learn to work secularly, work a secular job, get some incomes, take some of that money, set it aside for your church, and you're not always going to have the nice, fancy building. You may be in a storefront. Mm-hmm. You know, you may be in a storefront, and you may have to spend your own money. I don't know how many thousands of dollars that I have spent of my own money on the church that I started. Probably same with you as well.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, even after starting church, you know, you have a group of people that come in and they want to run you off. I said, look, I started this church. I got more blood and more sweat and more tears. You ain't going to run me off. You're gone. Not me. I'm not going anywhere. You know?
Right. Well, yeah, and I think, too, again, that kind of, again, my opinion on when it comes to the calling is, again, if you can't just look at this as like a job or if you're looking at it as something for any kind of selfish desire, you're going to be greatly let down.
Oh yeah.
Because some of the things that I know I've had to do, and I know you too, and this is kind of where I would really like to get I've thought about getting multiple pastors to kind of tell their stories about what they had to do to provide for their family, which is a responsibility, and still be a pastor. And a lot of people just have this mentality, I'm pastoring, I deserve a full-time salary. Well, I agree. I mean, the labor is worthy of his reward, but sometimes it's just not there.
No, it's not.
And, I've had to work crazy jobs, crazy hours in order to do what I'm doing. And it was a sacrifice, and it was with very little income. And I do know for me, and maybe I'm just bad at making money, but I mean, my biggest challenges over the years in the ministry, it's been the financial challenge, providing for family. You had a big family too.
Yeah.
And
it hasn't always been easy.
Yeah. I think I've always been very good at making a dollar go a long way. I've just never been good at getting lots of those dollars together at one time.
It's not all it's cracked up to be. So I told you at one time. So I have worked secular jobs, and then there were time frames where I actually owned my own business. And there was a time frame where owning my own business for a couple of years, I hate to say this, I made six figures owning my own business. And I wasn't even drawing. One of the biggest thing I kicked myself about was I remember there were times where I'd get my salary check and I just give it back to the church, turn it back into the church. And I thought, well, I'm making enough money, regardless of how much money that I made. And it was never interfering with my church responsibilities. It was pretty much automated. It was the craziest thing. And it's too bad I can't do it again today, because it was so easy when it first came out. But I had my own business, and it was mostly done through web, through the internet, and pretty much automated. I'd have a website. I'd run advertising through social media. The advertising would pop on their news page. They click it, it'd go to my website. They buy this product. The supplier would drop ship it to their. I didn't even have to do it. The only time I had to intervene is like if someone sent an email, I got my product and it was a piece of garbage. But it grew to the point to where it was starting to interfere with my ministry and my ministry responsibility. I remember talking to Dennis Coral about it, and he said, you know what? You made good money on it, I'd sell it. So I sold it. Signed a no compete contract with somebody for several years that I'd never go back, because I had thousands, 50,000 emails of my customers.
Wow.
Being able to go back and market those people again and again and again and again and send them marketing emails. That was great. But there was all sorts of different things that I have done, but it hasn't always been like that. There have been times where, really, literally, I'm just like praying, dear God, we need grocery money this week, but, and then there have been times in the ministry. So I've been pastoring 14 years, 13 years, somewhere around there. Out of those 13, 14 years, I would say that I've only been full-time pastoring to where, hey, I didn't have any secular income. I didn't have any exterior income to live probably 4 or 5 of those years. And there have been times where the church was way up in attendance and giving and different things like that. Then you'd upset a group of people, they'd leave.
Yep.
And then the finances would drop. And of course, I'm not going to go to the church and beg, oh, please, church, give me more money. Now, look, I set the example in being a hard worker. And I think that's vitally important that the pastor he sets the example of being a hard worker. If he's not, the others won't follow that example. And he's going to be worse than an infidel if he doesn't provide for his family. But there have been times, and even when I came here to Faith Baptist Church in Eureka, I didn't start out full-time. And just recently, the church voted to take me on full-time. So, and by the way, just to kind of give you realistic numbers, whenever I got to Faith Baptist Church, you take in mind whenever I have, I'm married and I had 6 children. I had 6 children living in my home. Between my housing and my salary, we're talking about like $3,000 a month between my housing and salary. Okay. People say, well, that's pretty good money. Yeah, it's pretty good money if it's just him and her and maybe a baby, but 6 other mouths to feed and different responsibilities. So anyway, the church grew to the place to where they could vote on taking me full time. And by the way, if you are watching this, is there anybody watching it?
Yeah, somebody.
So
yeah, and I'm sorry, folks, but I can't really pay attention to the live chat. I've seen some questions on there, but with our setup, I can't really interact, so we probably won't take any questions. But I do appreciate your participation.
So let me just say this: if you are watching this, and you are just a church member, you need to make sure, and I want to encourage you to make sure that your pastor is taken care of as best as he possibly can, as the best the church could possibly take care of them. And if not, you are doing your church an injustice. So you're also not taking care of your pastor. And if you plan on being in the ministry one day, you would hope that people will want to take care of you the same way. So it'd be good for you to pay that forward ahead of time and make sure your pastor is well taken care of. But the people of our church have been very good, and they voted on it unanimously that they were going to, take me on full time recently. And finances hasn't always been the easiest situation, and there have been times literally where we literally have to live by faith.
Right.
And I think that's something that's almost forgotten in our Christian circles today. Is this matter of living by faith, and the reason why is because. Why in the world will we want to live by faith? I got to make sure I cover this up since when we got one of these.
Yeah.
When we have a credit card, well, we don't have to live by faith anymore. So we could just live off credit, right? But I think that it's good for us as pastors. So going back to finances, it is difficult.
It is. Well, I was just thinking too, because I've been in the ministry now, or I've had like a title in the ministry for now almost 23 years.
Okay.
And I was thinking about it, only 9 of those years have I actually been full-time and not working another job. And so, again, so maybe you just don't want to follow my lead when it comes to these. I know some people, they got a full-time position right out of Bible college, and that's fantastic.
Awesome.
If you're doing the work and you've been able to get paid for it like you should, count yourself blessed.
Because that's not the majority.
No, it's not. But, at the same time, it is always your responsibility and my responsibility to, provide for your family. And for me, I've had to, many of those years, work other jobs. And it's not an easy thing. And it stinks, too, because, whatever job we do as men, we kind of take pride, you take pride in that. But it's hard to be focused on a job to where you can be real successful when you're also pastoring, too.
Yeah, what's awesome, as working in the secular realm, I'm sure it was the same way with you. Man, they see how you're faithful, you show up on time, you show up early, you stay late, you work hard, and they want to advance you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They want to put you in management.
Yep.
They want to pay you more money, and you're just like, hey, this is just a means to an end.
Right. And it's been that way every job I've worked. I could have done more.
Every single job.
Yep.
And, people think about this. It's really crazy. If we were not in the ministry, there's no doubt that we could actually settle for making a very good income in a job somewhere because we are hard workers. Right. And we show up on time. We show up faithfully. We don't bring our drama into work. We just go there, work hard, represent not necessarily the interest of our boss, but the interest of our king.
Well, in pastoring, too, it requires some leadership ability.
Exactly.
Knowing how to work with people, interacting with people, and so communication, all of that's important. The problem is when you use all those skills for the ministry, it doesn't always translate into money. I mean,
no.
and it doesn't mean we're failures in that area. I mean, again, Apostle Paul struggled sometimes financially. It's the ministry. While God and I'm not complaining too. I mean, the Lord has blessed us and taken care of us. And honestly, when I look back and when I look at what we have and opportunities I've had, I can't really figure out how we've been able to do that on the income I've made. I know people who've made a lot more money than I have made, but yet they don't have what I have. God figures out how to take care of us either way.
Yeah, going back to what I let me clarify something too. It's amazing to me how much money I made. And by the way, folks, if you make a lot of money, or for you like, oh man, I want to make a lot of money, you want to work my own job, that just means you're gonna have to pay more taxes.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that in there. I was telling this to my son Mike. I was like, he's like, Dad, did you really make that much money? I said, yeah. And you want me to tell you how much in taxes I paid? It was like almost like not even worth it. I'm so frustrated at the end of the year when you're like, man, I owe that much in taxes. Holy moly,
Yeah.
But anyway, the money sometimes you make, and then there have been times literally where I tell my son, don't you dare complain about anything you're eating. We don't have enough snacks. We don't have enough food. We don't have I said, it's a good thing that you weren't alive when your sister was alive. When she was like a 1-year-old and your brother was in the womb. And I'm telling Mike, who's my Jody Josiah. So he's a fourth child. He's graduating high school and going into Bible college next year. So he's 17 years old. I'm like, so just let me. It's a good thing our finances aren't now what they were when your sister was a baby. Because let me tell you what we lived off: macaroni and ramen noodles. Macaroni, cheese, and ramen noodles. He's like, man, I love macaroni and cheese and ramen noodles. Yeah, but not for breakfast and lunch and dinner, every day.
Beans and rice and rice
because
and beans.
That's all you could afford. But hey, we made those sacrifices then. And as a young preacher, young preacher may see what we have now. And what we have now is not extravagant, but to their eyes, they're like, man, I could have that, or I could have better. It's almost like the child that sees what their parents have and they didn't work for it and they want it now. There's young preachers out there that see what we have now, even though it may not be much, but it's still more than what they have. And they're just like, oh, I want that plus more.
Yes.
And I want it now, not even realizing the sacrifices, the hard work, the determination, the blood, sweat, and tears that it's going to take to even get you to that place.
And I feel like, that's always been a problem with young people wanting stuff now. I think I remember, my dad complaining about my generation being that way. But I really feel like the Zoomers are just the worst at just wanting it all and wanting it now. And, and when we're talking about going into the ministry too, something I'm always tried to express to people is, pastoring is not the only way to be in the ministry. There are so many opportunities. So many other things that you could be doing where you're ministering to a lot of people. In fact, when I started the church here, when we started out, we were actually, I feel very blessed. We started out pretty much with about 25 people. We're starting from scratch. That's great. But at the same time, I came from a ministry where I was full-time. My youth department, my teen class had about 30 some in there. The choir I directed had 30 some in there. My bus route had 40. So it's like every ministry I was involved in, and it was several, all had more people than my entire church did now. And so during those first years, in a lot of ways, I almost felt like I was doing less ministry because I was involved in so many different ministries, had a lot of things going on, which when I started the church, I felt like all I was doing was knocking doors because that's really all there was to do. Because of the fact that, we're just getting started, not much is going on. We don't have all these ministries. We don't have that many people yet. So I didn't have anything to do. But, I'd be done getting my messages for the weekend on Monday and Tuesday, sometimes. So then I knock a ton of doors. But, before I was pastoring, I was in the ministry. Before I was before I had a title, I was in the ministry.
Yeah, same thing.
I was ministering to people. I was doing a lot of things, and sometimes when you're having those rough days when you're pastoring, I think back to that time where I had more of just the supportive role and not the leadership role, and I realize, I think I understand now more that I'm a pastor, how much I was actually doing and accomplishing for the ministry as a support guy.
Right.
To where it's just like sometimes you're just like, man, it'd be nice to just be that support guy where you're still working, you're still doing a ministry, you're doing a great work for the Lord, but you also don't kind of have all eyes on you and the burden that comes with that and all that responsibility and the heartache. You've always got you can always pass the challenging things over to the pastor. And so. I would encourage young men who want to be in the ministry to go in the ministry and be that support guy in your church until, not until you get this, ordination that you want or this role that you want, but no, until your church comes to you. It's like, hey, we've got a need over here,
right,
for a church in this area. We think you'd be a good one to do that. And I think too many people are coming into churches with this attitude, I want to be the guy on top. Tell me how to get there. Tell me how to get there right now. And while I don't have a problem with long-term goals and things, I think we need to get a little more focus on what are you supposed to be doing today. And if you are in God's will today, I don't care if you have a title that's not pastor, or even if you don't have a title. If you're in God's will, you're serving the Lord, you're being a witness, you're being a help in your church, you are in the ministry.
Right.
And so just keep working on that reputation of faithfulness. And God someday will look and count you faithful. And if it is the desire of your heart to be a pastor or something like that, I think he'll give that to you. That's what I believe about it.
When you talk about that desire, and maybe this get into it about the ministry itself. I believe that God was dealing with me about pastoring. I did not want to pastor. I was the type of person, and so I was in the ministry prior to pastoring. I was in evangelism. And I traveled to churches and I preached, and I loved to preach, but I didn't want to interact with people. Okay, and when I say this, if you have known me or do know me, you would know this. Prior to me being in the ministry, I was just like, okay, really, I have my wife, I have my children, I'll witness to people, I'll soul win, but in regard to everyday interaction with people, I was borderline introvert, and God had to take me through some things to get me. I would go to the mission field before I'd pastor a church. I would be willing to do that. I'll go in evangelism. I'll be an assistant pastor. I'll be a youth pastor. I just did not want to pastor. And that's really a very, very important thing. Okay? So God had to break me to get me to say, okay, Lord, I've surrendered everything else. Besides this, I will not do this, but now I finally will do this. I will do this, and I want to do this. And the Bible even talks about that in First Timothy chapter 3. It just says, it says, this is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. You talk about that desire. There's people that are called, I believe, to be a pastor, but they never get to that point of desire. I don't know how many people I've known that, like, man, they're like, man, I really felt like God was dealing with me about pastor. I just really didn't feel like it. I didn't. You have to have that desire. If you don't have that desire, you're not going to last a long time. I know what I'm called to do at this point. And it was amazing prior to pastoring and being in that state of not fully submitting to God. When I was an evangelist, I'd get a person ask me about being an assistant pastor. I'd think about it, and I'd contemplate, and I'd talk to my preacher. He's like, what are you doing? And I talked about this thing and doing this thing and this thing. He said to me, you can't be like a little butterfly. And you know who I'm talking about. You can't be now that you mentioned that, I think I do. You can't be a little butterfly looking at every pretty little flower that comes your way and landing on it. Okay? So, but since I fully submitted and surrendered and desired to be a pastor and became a pastor, there's nothing I've ever desired to do since then. Nothing. Yeah. I don't look at evangelists and say, man, I wish I had his job. I wish I could do I don't look at a missionary, say, man, assistant pastor. I joke around about it. It's real easy for us, but I desire the work of a pastor. There's nothing or nobody that can convince me otherwise that I should be doing something else. When I was doing something else, people would try to, and I was convinced, maybe I'm not doing what I should be doing. Well, I didn't have the desire. The desire was not there. Yeah. Desire the fire before you expire, anyway.
Well, yeah, and I know what you're saying, too, because when I was younger, I went through several phases of different things that I wanted to do. But the one thing that I'm very thankful for, I knew other people my age who I felt like had jumped all over the place in the ministry, just constantly moving their family around, and I didn't want to be that way. And so I finally got to a point in my life, in my early 20s, where I decided, we'd started having kids right away when we got married, and I'm just like, I only want to have to move my kids one time. That was I knew I was probably going to pastor someday, But I was like, I'm not going anywhere until I know for sure what God wants me to do. And then once he gives me something to do, I'm going to go, and it will be my intention. I'm not saying God can never call somebody away, or God never will. But, I'm going to go there with the mindset, I'm going there and staying there. And I will say, since I've started this church, I've been very content, and I don't have a desire to do anything else. And I don't admire anyone else's job. I really don't. I'm so thankful for, where I'm at. And it's nice too. You need that, because you need to be focused on where you're at. You do need to learn how to bloom where you're planted. And you can't always be looking, over the fence at the neighbor's yard and, trying to, saying the grass is greener. And it really
it's always greener over a septic field.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to talk about this next part, because you mentioned talking to the preacher that, gave you that advice. But, let's talk about the importance of other pastors in your life. And because I know I grew up in a pastor's home, and, I grew up, there were, obviously my dad was my pastor all those years. But I'm thankful for other men that were in the ministry that were in my life, that were real close to me, that were, like grandfather figures. Some of them, I always, even as a teenager, I got along with the old preachers, and I was always taught, when they're around, try to glean whatever wisdom you can, get to know them. And I'm really thankful for many of those older men who paid a lot of attention to me, as a young man, that were looking out for me, paid attention. They were very influential in my life. A lot of those guys are in heaven now, but I still have some of them too. I just talked to an older pastor the other day. I just needed some advice on some things, and this is a guy who is way farther down the road than I am, who's been through everything that I'll experience, and he was somebody too who, when I started the church, I got to know and spent a lot of time with. But I do know that other pastors have been a huge blessing to me. And what are your thoughts on that? Especially, having the older preachers, but even too, I'm thankful for, the younger pastors too, the guys my age who are kind of in the same spot that I'm in.
Right.
They've encouraged me greatly. I've talked to, I know when I started the church here, I had some friends that were starting churches around the same time, and we became really close through all that, because we're just kind of fighting the same battles at the same time. And it was really nice to kind of have them, and knowing they're struggling in the same way we are. And I think that's really important. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, personally in our church, there's only been a handful of times that I've actually had preachers in that were younger than me. Most of the time they were older than me. I remember one time early on in our ministry, I was starting to veer toward a direction that I didn't know where it was going to take me. I'm glad I didn't. I had an older preacher, Brother Coral. He came and just said, look, I know that's attractive, but you don't need to go that direction. And I believe it kept me from breaking my full neck regarding several things, because I've seen, guys my age go that direction. Look where their churches are at today. But I would not be here, if it weren't for the investment of the older preachers, that I've had in my life. Several of them are in heaven, today. The preacher I got saved under, he's with the Lord. Preacher I felt like I was called to preach under, he's with the Lord. Preacher I spent most of my Christian life with, as a non-pastor. He's still in the ministry, but he's no longer a pastor. But these are men, and then anytime I have, a church issue, I've never called anyone younger than me. I've always called, there's a couple men, Pastor Terry Angel and Pastor Joe Grimaldi. These are people that I call and lean on pretty heavy. And then there's a couple evangelists that I'll call. on a regular basis. But these men help me tremendously. Now, I have friends that are our age, and some of them, they don't like the older men. They're just like, they're just a bunch of grumpy old guys or whatever, and different things like that. And yes, they can be. Okay? And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. And the idea is we take in the meat, we spit out the bones. Whatever we see in them that could be changed, how about we change it in ourselves so we're not that way, okay? Not all people are good to us, but all people are good for us.
Right.
All right? Regardless of their quirks or ticks. Now, these men are not without flaw, but they are men that helped us get to where we are at today. And that doesn't necessarily mean they deserve our extreme loyalty to where we're lemmings falling off the cliff, but to a degree, there are men that have been influenced in my life that are no longer in the ministry. I thank God for them. But what we can learn from them is what not to do. So, we warn the next generation. But anyway, I choose, there's a generation after. So I'm 44 years old. There's a generation after me, but there's also a generation before me. I don't want to blow up the bridge and say, oh, the old timers, they don't know anything. I think they knew quite a bit. And matter of fact, many of them have fought battles for us to be where we are today and get to enjoy. And it's amazing, some of the same battles we're fighting, they fought. It's just a never-ending cycle of battles that they fought. But anyway, between the old generation and the younger generation past me, I choose to be the bridge. The younger generation past me, they don't understand the guys that are in their 60s right now or even 70s right now. It's like completely foreign to them. So it's my job to be the bridge, to bring them to that place instead of them looking at like, oh, man, these guys are just a bunch of grandpas. They're completely out of touch with reality and life and different things like that. Whatever they want to say, they don't know how to operate a smartphone. Technology, YouTube, whatever the deal is. I choose to be the bridge and help them to make that gap. Now, if I just choose to blow up that bridge, they're going to be stranded and they're going to miss that older generation. Yeah. And they're going to go in the way of whatever crazy way. But I'm very thankful for the older men in my life. I really am.
Right. Well, I think it's very important, and I would challenge any pastor that's our age too, that you definitely shouldn't be afraid of allowing these men to have their say. I mean, if you're so sure you're right, why are you so scared of their scrutiny? Why? Because why wouldn't they have something to offer? And again, yeah, they're not flawless. Yes, they make mistakes, but at the same time too, if they've been influential in your life, if they've been a blessing, if they've been a help to you, shouldn't you at least give them a chance to say something? If you are going to make a big decision, make a big change. And, and I'll just say this too, because I've had some pretty epic showdowns, I guess you could say, with some different pastors that have been in my life. But I will say this, while I've had some preachers get really ugly with me, I guess I could put it that way. For example, I just, redid my office. I was cleaning a bunch of stuff out of my desk. I actually found a letter that I had saved that was pretty mean that somebody sent me.
You know what, Tommy? You probably deserved it.
You know what? I'm just being honest. I didn't. But let me tell you something. I without a doubt, this individual, without a doubt, cared very much about me. Without a doubt. And so, and the thing is too, now that time has passed too, they have been, this person has been a blessing to me in multiple ways, in multiple areas, and we got past our difference. Obviously in this one area, we never fully agreed, but there was a misunderstanding, I believe, on his part about, where I was heading and all that kind of stuff. And I do believe that the rebuke that I got was one out of concern and love. And I didn't. Right. I had to make a decision when that happened, because I had a ton of respect for this individual. I still do, even more than I did back then. But I had to make a decision. It's like, I am the pastor of this church, but I shouldn't be afraid to allow men who have been a great influence in my life and have been a blessing to me to have their say. And at the end of the day, if we disagree, I can be respectful to them, and because of their experience and all they've been to me, they need to be respectful to me and allow me to make the decision that I've chosen to make, because I'm the one pastoring this church, not them. And I think that's what happened. And I'm glad when at first, we kind of had a conflict going, that I didn't write off every good thing that he had done and just burn a bridge or something like that, because we got past that. And again, but we were able to get past that because this person had shown me that they cared about me. And there's other preachers like that I could talk about who, even when we disagreed, I knew they cared. And so it's like, you know what? I'm not going to fear these guys opposing me, because sometimes too, they are right. There's been a lot of times where they were right. And, there's been times where I think I was right, but I think it just it's kind of cowardly to try to bypass them and hide from them, especially if they've done a lot for you. We ought to be able to handle that. And I think it's a huge waste to not use these guys and get their wisdom, get their input. And because I will say this too, even on some of these people who've disagreed with me, I do believe their opposition, you could say, and that influence they did have in my life kept me from maybe going to a greater extreme, right, a certain direction, and it helped balance me out. And I think it's really important to have people like that in your life. And it is the peers, the guys that are the same age are good too, but the older ones are better. They really are. They are.
And you know what? And I have been on the other end of that, where somebody was reproving me or chiding on me, admonishing me, and I didn't feel like they were right to do. But I, looking at it after it was said and done, there was no doubt that these people, the only reason why they wanted to do this was because they did care and they did love.
And you can understand why they had those concerns.
Of course. Going back
Look
to
at what people our age are doing.
Of course. But also going back to what I was talking about us as parents. We do the same thing. We do the same thing with our children. Okay, we do the same thing with our very own children. And our children must think sometimes, man, my dad or my mom, they hate my guts. They're holding out on me. When we are doing this out of love and concern. Going all the way back to the garden, what did Satan tell Eve? God's holding out on you. God's keeping things back from you. The only reason why he's keeping you is because you're going to be as gods like him. And it's the same tactic. And when something like that happens to us, even with the older men of God, it's almost the same thing. This person doesn't care about you, whatever. What does he know?
Right.
What does God know? What does this man know? And you can imagine how the Lord felt whenever they gave in to Satan, right? Whenever they gave in to that, how did he feel? And, these people that invest in our life, when we just completely write them off because we feel like we were unjustly treated, forgetting that, yes, they are doing this out of love and care and concern for us.
Right.
So when we get over this hump of when we just swallow our pride and look back and say, oh, yeah, you know what? They legitimately did that because they love us, they care about us, and we're so much better for it. Really are.
Yeah.
I've been on the same end of different things before in my life with them.
And it is because it's humbling. When you are a grown adult, when you're in your 30s and your 40s, and you're getting a royal chewing.
Oh yeah, and you think you think to yourself, I'm 30 something years old. You think you're old and mature.
They treat you like you're a teenager,
right? You're like, man, I got a wife and I got all these kids. My kids don't even. I'm sitting there thinking, who does this guy think he is? Well, you know what? I believe that God placed that person there for such a time as this, just to remind you who you are.
Right.
You know, who you are, squirt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, let's just hope and pray one day when we are of that age that we are remembering this conversation.
Mm-hmm. I know. I try
especially in the snowflake generation
Right.
we have today.
Yeah, I try to think about that too, because I will say this too. I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the guys too who, you know, when they have disagreed with what I was doing, or not like something I was doing, and they gave me an earful, whatever. You know, I'm glad too that not all of them like burned bridges and just like, you know, completely wrote me off and stuff. Because again, as time has passed, you know, there's things that have changed. You know, they've been able, you know, things that maybe they were concerned was going to happen hasn't happened, and I'm glad we're still able to have some kind of relationship. Or, you know, there's other people. It's like you have pastors who want to be your boss, and I want to be a pastor that somebody can come to, like another pastor, and get advice. And I'll mention one guy, Pastor Castle. He used to pastor not far from me, and you know, for health reasons, he had to step down, and he's in his son's church now. I talked to him recently. One of the things I always appreciated about him is whenever you go to him for advice, he was one of these guys who was as blunt as anyone, but at the same time, he would, you know, he just wasn't wasting time. You know, he's like, you know, Brother Tommy, he's like, you know, I'm going to give you my 2 cents. You can take what you want, do what you want with it, but this is what I think. And he would tell you exactly what he thought. He would tell you exactly what he thought you should do. But the thing is, if you didn't do it, he didn't hate you. You know, he's still one of the best for it. Where some preachers...
That's good. Oh, yeah. If you don't do it exactly the way that they say.
I'm afraid to go to some preachers for advice because they don't want to give me advice. They want to give me orders. Mm-hmm. And if I don't do exactly what they tell me to do, they're going to pray down curses on me.
Considering the fact that, you know, you got advice from other pastors as well.
Yeah, it's like you realize, yeah,
you're like, yeah. Okay, they get upset because you didn't do exactly what they said.
Mm-hmm.
Considering the fact you talked to, then they could say, well, you didn't, you came to me. You know, I am XYZ, or I am better. So
yeah, you're just one of my multitude of
counselors.
Right,
multitude of counselors. There is safety.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, I mean, of course, you got to listen to all of the counsel, and you have to look at what's taking place in your specific church.
Right.
You know, and it's good, you know, because I don't know about you, but I've actually talked to several older pastors about a situation. I'll talk to 3, and all 3 of them contradict what one of them.
Well, because they're comparing whatever you're telling them about to probably a situation that they dealt with.
Exactly.
And it might, and their situation might not be super akin to the one that you're in, but that there might be one of those pastors when he's telling his story and basing his advice off of that. It actually is something that's more in line with your situation. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, but yeah, you know, either way they're valuable. Yeah. And if I could say something to any older preachers that are listening to this, again, yeah, allow people to come to you for you advice without you giving them orders, you know. And here's the thing too, if they don't follow your advice and you turn out to be right, next time they're probably going to listen to you.
That opens up a whole conversation about advice. You know, if you're watching and you're a member of a church, you need to go to your pastor to get advice, not another pastor.
Yes.
From across the country or in another state. God gave you that pastor for a specific reason and for a specific purpose, and you need to go to him. Well, I don't want him to know our business. Quit being so prideful. That pastor knows you better than the pastor that lives 600 miles away. Okay? And that pastor isn't going to be able to help you because he doesn't know you as well as your own pastor. But you need to go to your own pastor of your own church. And if you don't like your own pastor of your church, go to the church where you do like that pastor, where you do trust that pastor.
Yep. Everybody who watches my program is like, you need to go listen to last week's. That's exactly what I talked about in my last week's live stream about the danger of getting counsel online. Those people don't know you, and so it's impossible for them to understand your situation. And that's why, again, too, so pastors, for that preacher who doesn't take your advice, again, your experience and situation didn't really match his. What you did in your church in a similar situation probably was right for your situation. But he ended up, maybe he got advice from a pastor who had a situation that was much more similar to his, or maybe too, sometimes, as a pastor too, when I've talked to other preachers, there's other preachers out there who have been to our church and know the people in our church too. And so a lot of times they can have better input because they understand our situation here, where there's other pastors that, they're wise men, but they've never been to my church. They don't know the people in my church. And that would probably change their opinion on a lot if they came here.
And I want to make it another statement. So if you're a pastor and you're watching this, don't counsel other people's members, other pastors' members.
But we all have a Messiah complex.
Yeah, right.
Fix everybody's problems.
I don't understand this. I actually have people that have contacted me. Mm-hmm. Every time they'll lay it out. Oh, blah, 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 lay it out. I said, what did your pastor say? Well, I haven't talked to him. I said, I'm not going to advise you of anything. You need to listen to exactly what your pastor says. Mm-hmm. Have a great day. I've done that. And if you're a pastor and you're watching, that's the right thing to do. Defer to that person's pastor, regardless if they like him, regardless of whatever story they call. Matter of fact, it'd probably do you great justice to call that pastor and say, your member of your church contacted me for counsel. Is it okay? Believe it or not, the way that you treat other church members of other churches is oftentimes what's going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. It's going to come right back to you.
I've had people before, too, who have contacted me wanting advice for their situation. And it was like, and I know the pastor of their church, and I almost feel like these people, them coming to me was their way of tattling on their pastor. And it was like they were hoping I was going to say, like, man, your pastor's crazy, your pastor's terrible. And when people do that, that's when I really get suspicious, and I try to be as short with these people as I possibly can, because I don't want to get involved in that. Because obviously, if I'm going, I tell people this all the time. It's like, you can't ask me to judge this situation. For me to properly judge this situation, I've got to hear you out and what you have to say, but then I'm going to have to call up your pastor. I'm going to have to call up these people. It's like, do you really want me to do all that? I mean, do I have to do that? Do I have to become the judge in your church's situation? Mm-hmm. I was like, I don't have time for that. And so, but I really think when people do that, calling other pastors like that, it is kind of their way of tattling. And especially if you know the pastor.
It can be. It can be a form of tattling, or I go even as far as just saying, well, I talked to Pastor McMurtry of Liberty Baptist, and this is what he told me to do.
Right.
What do you think?
And I dare you to say something different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
God gave you a pastor that knows you, that knows your situation, knows your life, knows your family, knows your children, whatever the situation is, knows your parents, and he gave that pastor to you specifically. And if you have a problem with your pastor, then go find a church where you don't have a problem with the pastor, and you trust him, and you lean on him. I always encourage that. Why would you put yourself through that? Mm-hmm. Why would you stay at a church where you are absolutely miserable, you disagree with most stuff that goes on there, you don't like your pastor? I could not function like that.
I know.
I could not thrive in a church like that at all whatsoever. And I just would say, I always encourage people, go find a church where you can go there, you can grow, you could serve, you can win souls, you could submit to the pastor, you could submit to the church, and you're a servant while you're there.
Now, please help me out here and tell me you've dealt with this before. Have you ever had that person who's just that you thought everything was great, and they just proceeded to one day unload and tell you just what a horrible, vile, wicked person you are, and they've known about how horrible you are for months and years, and you had no idea. You thought, you loved them and you thought they loved you, but then you find out you're like the worst person in the world. And my question to these people is just like, so why have you been coming to the church here all this time? Because I wouldn't go to a church that had a pastor as wicked as what you're describing right now. Are you sure you felt that way about me? Because if you did, what were you doing here all this time?
Right.
I'd have got out as soon as I found out how bad I was. But
it's always amazing that, part of the challenges in the ministry is the heartache that you have from people that go that route. The mask comes off, things get ugly, and then things get petty. I mean, just petty junior high stuff, okay? Junior high stuff. You're going to split hairs over junior high stuff, okay? Little things. And then to make the accusation or say to you or the comment to you that you are XYZ, this type of person, after all that you have invested in them, okay, and you have accommodated them, and you have loved them, you have prayed for them, you have done all sorts of different things for them to say, why would you, okay, if that's the case, why have you been here?
Yeah. Because and as a pastor, too, we understand it's important that we're godly, that we're spirit-filled, that, we love the Lord, and that, we try to be good Christians. And then when somebody just proceeds to, give you your report card and you're just, you're one step above Judas Iscariot, you're just like...
You're reprobate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like...
I've been reprobated.
Yeah. It's just like, it's not a good feeling.
But
especially when you thought you were doing good, being loving, being sacrificial. You thought you were doing all those things, and then you're just, you sold these people for 30 pieces of silver, apparently.
But you know what? Unfortunately, you just take your hat and walk. I mean, you just that's all you can do. You can't dwell on it. Yeah. It will drive you crazy. I mean, there have been, and honestly, as honest I could say this as pastor, there have been times where someone will make a comment to me that way, and I have exploded on them. The last time the comment was made to me of that nature, and I basically said, you know what, you're probably right. That's probably the best way. And that wasn't a false humility, but they're probably right. Maybe it was the Lord using them to tell me, hey, I need to get my heart right or whatever, So, but either way.
Well, I think what you probably have to do is take your top 3 praisers and throw out what they say, and your top 3 critics and throw out what they say, and just go off the middle.
You know who my biggest critic is? Me.
Well, they're good. I'd love to throw my opinion out.
Good night.
Yeah,
I tell you
beat
what,
myself up pretty good.
Oh yeah, especially Monday. Monday morning after Sunday. But
okay, we've not talked about this at all, but I guarantee you know about it. But see if you can describe to the audience just the. I've heard other pastors refer to like just the. I don't know what you call it, the pastoral Monday blues, or the it's like recovery day after you got the snot beat out.
Monday's the only day I'm a recovering fundamentalist. Yeah. I'm recovering from Sunday, but I'm just kidding, folks. I'm not a recovering.
Yeah, because I mean, you like you said, when you preach those sermons that you don't want to preach, I mean, it's just like sometimes I just get done preaching. And it's like, and I know I preached what I had to preach, but I feel so unpopular. You just kind of want to like just leave and go like hide under a rock somewhere.
Let me just tell you this. If you are seeking the pastorate to be at the top of the totem pole per se, remember it's always lonely at the top.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I mean by that is you could get up and scream, like some of those guys, and different things like that. And you can have a good time doing it and think you're cool, calling people out and yelling and screaming and, different things like that. But the reality is that there is Monday, I try to make sure that I keep this in the right perspective. I was talking about people getting bent out of shape on Sunday night. I was preaching on the subject, making a difference. Mm-hmm. Okay. what moves us. You know, the truth is that I said this to the church. If we went outside after church and found out every single one of our cars were keyed, someone took a key to all of our cars, both sides, up and down, man, we'd be so dog mad about that. We'd be raging and we'd be mad and fisting just, you know. And then I asked him, how long has it been mad since you hadn't seen someone saved in church? You know, are you mad that you didn't lead someone to Christ? Are you mad, you know, you haven't had a prayer answered? Are you mad? We just get so worked up on what we get mad about. So Monday morning, sometimes, yes, I do feel like I'm the lonely guy. I had to preach that message. Or I'm a failure. You know, nobody got saved. You know, offerings are down. You know, this person got upset with me. You know, everything, you know, the service just didn't gel right. You know, this song, it wasn't, we can't sing that song again.
Sometimes just like that, I really did a bad job preaching that message. It's like, can I get a do-over?
Especially when you go back and you watch it again, and you're like, oh, I can't believe. I know it, because I was telling the folks.
4 people fell asleep.
I was telling the folks, I was preaching on the radio, and then I was listening to myself Sunday morning, and I just thought, man, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And I was talking about David and Bathsheba, and I brought in Uriah, and I made the reference to Bathsheba's wife. And I said, oh, I can't believe I said that. Well, I can't go back and change it. It's already been recorded. It's already been sent in. It's already playing.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there thinking, man, why did I say that? And the whole time, you know, I just made the mention one time, but I heard it. You know, my wife was like, oh, probably nobody heard it, but I heard it, and that's all that matters. You know, it's amazing to me how God uses not necessarily only the foolishness of preaching, but the foolishness of preachers. And you think about, the only way that our preaching would be perfect is all we did was stand up and just quote Scripture.
Yeah, and we would mess that up too.
We would.
One thing that drives me crazy, when I was in Israel, we recorded a Bible Way to Heaven video, and this might not even seem like a big deal, but it still drives me nuts. I probably shouldn't mention this because now everybody's going to notice it, but like, I'm quoting a verse, and I'm quoting a well-known verse, Romans 10, and I said confession is made known unto salvation. I added known in there, and then I watched it and I was like, why did I add known in there? I know that word's not in there, and it just bothered me, you know, and I was trying to find a way. I was hoping I could cut it out without it being noticeable. You couldn't do it. But anyway, then I watched another video where we filmed another one in a different location. I did the exact same thing. And I'm just like, how did I do that twice? I know that verse, you know, it just, you know, but I don't know. We beat the snot out of ourselves sometimes for goofy stuff. And I don't know, you know, maybe we probably are our biggest critics, but we need to wrap this up here pretty quick. But I do want to ask some of these here real quick. But talk about the challenge of fighting battles that, you know, we're facing today where we have this changing culture, but we have a Bible that doesn't change. You know, we've talked a lot about just being unpopular, lonely, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, preachers, while we might not always act like it in how we preach, you know, you want people to come back. You want people to like you. You know, you want to be liked on them, but you also have to preach the truth. But it seems like it's getting harder and harder to not be perceived as like a nutcase today because our world's getting so crazy. I mean, I'm amazed at some of the videos that are out there about me making me like the most terrible person in the world just because I'm saying stuff against trannies, and it's just like, I thought everybody was against that, you know, but it's like I'm like a fringe guy for, you know,
the problem is they
dress, you know?
The problem is they've drank too much of that tranny beer.
Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah. But it's like you can't even say anything about that, you know, and you're like looked at as like this crazy nut job. I'm pretty sure almost everybody in the country has a big problem with that. But at the same time, you know, we aren't supposed to change from the Bible. And just, you know, but it's getting challenging. Our culture's going down the toilet fast, and we don't get to move with it. And the thing is, we've got a lot of guys, especially ones our age, who are pretending to be independent Baptists, and they are changing with the culture. And they are joining the world in talking about how terrible we are for not going along with that. What's that like, dealing with that?
Our culture is in a dumpster fire. Period. Report. It's like a fire sale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I think about what Jesus said about that salt losing its savor.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Our salt has lost its savor. Salt makes all the difference, especially, man, you talk about some French fries, that golden French fries from McDonald's, good night in the morning. Right? I'm telling you, make sure you salt your French fries. You folks that don't like salt on your French fries, get right with God.
Amen.
So, but salt makes all the difference. But we have cast our pearls before the swine. Our salt, it's being trampled on.
Mm-hmm.
Part of I believe this all my heart. Part of what we're dealing with, the battles just in regard to transgenderism, comes forth from us as children of God. I believe not dressing appropriately. Independent fundamental Bible believing Baptists have crossed the lines and blurred the lines with their dress standards. We have been known as the last people to take that stand, draw the line in the sand, and so now we got supposedly independent fundamental Baptists, just saying, oh, it's no big deal. We can compromise all we want to. When years ago, every denomination took a stand, every Christian person said, okay, ladies dress like ladies, men dress like men. Now the lines are blurred, even by those that bear the name of Christ, bear the name of God, even people of God. But it goes into a lot of things. So culturally.
Well, and they often will talk about how culture dictates what it means to dress as a man and what it means to dress as a woman. And I would say historically, there's probably some truth to that. But here's the thing. Our culture sees no difference between men and women. You can't let a culture that depraved dictate anything. And so the thing is, in the past, cultures have always had flaws and problems, but they also recognized what a man was. They knew what a woman was, and they knew that they were different. And so, yeah, and those cultures, typically, It was very obvious, what was women's clothing and what was man's clothing. And it is the culture who started losing that distinction is the culture who produced the transgender movement. And so so what they're doing, they're saying something that's kind of true, I guess, but they're jumping to a false conclusion and acting like that it's right. But it's like, no, yeah, our culture is dictating things, but our culture is dictating there is no difference. And that's just wrong.
And right. And it doesn't help having all these major corporations go woke.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's not helping the cause. But still, it is still a very very small group, minority of people that actually participate in this debauchery. Mm-hmm. But they want the majority, the 97.5% of the rest of the country, whether if you're saved, whether if you're lawful, whether you're a Christian, whether you're not, whether if you're atheist, to accept it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't accept it, the problem's with you. That kind of thing. But
and it stinks because, and the world's getting more hostile towards us, and we're also trying to lead people in our church to stay with the Bible on this, which means we're kind of putting them, in the crosshairs too. And we're required to do this. We've still not resisted unto blood. We really can't complain, especially when you look at what they dealt with. We have it
really easy.
Yeah, especially when you look at what they dealt with in the Bible. But again, I guess it goes back to what we're talking about at the beginning. If you're in this for any selfish reasons, you are going to be disappointed, because if you're going to do things right, if you're going to do things according to the Bible, you're not going to be popular. You're going to deal with a lot of grief. And if you want, you can do like the trendies and just go with the flow, go along with the culture. But again, I think those are the guys that they're just in it for themselves. And I think a lot of people are like that, but I'm just not interested in that. I don't think God's going to bless that. And, but yeah, so last thing, we'll just kind of cover these together, but talk about the importance and just
wife and children.
Wife and children, because the ministry, while the pastor kind of, is the focus is on him, and while we are the one in charge, without a doubt, what we do, it affects our wife and children, and our wife and children. I know my wife and children have been a huge help. They don't have a title, they don't get a paycheck, but at the same time, I mean, they have been right there with me, doing everything, and so I feel like. I tell men all the time, you got to make sure your wife's on board. And a lot of them, I think they're kind of dragging them in because they're in charge. And yeah, I agree, you're in charge. But again, is she on board? Because if she's fighting you on this, you're going to have enough stuff to fight. If you're fighting your wife too, it's not going to go well.
Yeah. If you are not a team.
Right.
That is the best way that I could put it. Of course, I don't believe in women pastors.
Right. And of course, men, you're the team leader.
Right, exactly. But if you are not a team, it just isn't going to work. And I'm not just saying the tag team and the woman's involved in everything, and I'm not saying that at all. But you understand that the wife can make or break that ministry. It can. And ladies, if you are not submissive, I mean, I could take you through Ephesians 5 and just lay it all out there for you. I mean, I can hammer you if you're not submissive to your husband. Okay, if you're not submissive to your husband, you don't need to be in the ministry. Okay, and husband, if your wife is submissive to you. If she's not, don't pursue the ministry till that's right. Okay, bottom line. And for you to think, well, I've had this said about my wife. Well, she's too submissive. She's too submissive. If you know my wife, she is submissive.
How is that even possible?
I don't know. Believe it or not, they must not know her as well as I know her. But the truth is, it's reciprocated. The more the husband follows Christ, and the more that he loves his wife, and gives himself for it as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, the more submissive she is going to be. It's amazing to me to see that. And then she will be more submissive. The more submissive she is, the more that he's going to love her, the more that he's going to give himself for her. It's just a constant circle. But if he's not following Christ, if he is not loving her and as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, she is not going to be submissive. So oftentimes when men talk to me about their wife being submissive, well, she just isn't submissive. I always like to harp on, are you loving her the way that you should? Are you giving her the love, the care, and attention she needs? And are you giving yourself to them? And oftentimes that's not the case. He just wants to be like the Neanderthal.
Right.
Me, man, you woman, poof, drag her by the hair, that sort of thing. So that goes both ways. But having a wife on board is vitally, vitally important whenever it comes to the ministry. I could not do it. I could not do it without my wife. I just could not do it. And you will not be able to do it. You will only be able to do it for so long. But that husband, that wife, they have to have thick skin, because people are going to talk about you. And they're going to say mean things about you. And husband, if you're potentially seeking the pastor, people will use your wife to get to you. And people will use your children to get to you. They'll text your wife these silly, piddly junior high things, and you're just like, why are you being so childish, about it? But your wife has to be fully on board and ready to engage that. And then when people ill-treat you, how's she going to respond? Is she going to respond in a manner that's going to blow up and just be like, when that's really not supposed to be an attribute of a woman, a godly woman. So it's vitally, vitally important. Husband and wife need to be team. Wife needs to back up the husband. And if you are a wife that potentially wants to be a pastor's wife, I've dealt with this before too, where the wife thinks, oh, being a pastor's wife is just being there pretty and dainty. And, you got to work too. That means sometimes you have to clean. That means sometimes you have to sweep in the church. Don't be so pretty and so beautiful and just sit there and look beautiful and take up the space. Oh, I'm the pastor's wife. Everybody should honor me. That sort of thing. And you're not working. You're not serving yourself. And also, so going to the children, I was reading, about the sons of Eli.
Mm-hmm.
Your children aren't going to be perfect, but they could disqualify me if they were the sons of Eli.
Right.
Now look, I currently have one wayward son. He's an adult. He no longer lives in our house. When he chose to rebel, I said, hey, you know the rules of my house? You can't stand here. He understood that moving in. So I understand that not all of our children will follow the Lord. And it doesn't matter how much care and nurture and admonition we give them. It's going to boil down to their personal choice. Mm-hmm. But our children that are in church, they have to be on board, and they have to be part of the team as well. Mm-hmm. My kids, they go and clean the church. They vacuum the floors. They pick up the trash. They go soul winning. They work on the bus route. They help teach in junior church and different things of that nature. They sing. They serve. They're not so proud that I'm the pastor's kid. I don't have to take out the trash. Or I'm the pastor's kid. Who are you to tell me what to do? Now listen, our whole family lives in a glass house. If you're not a pastor, your family will live in a glass house, and there will be people that want to throw rocks at it. And believe it or not, they're going to find things that are wrong with you.
Yeah, and it's typically the people whose families aren't doing too good themselves. It's like, so what I've observed, it's like you have these people, they're not doing anything you preach. And obviously, it's not working well for them. So what they have to do is prove it's not working for you either. So they find every little thing wrong.
Or they attempt
with your
to.
Kids. Or they attempt to. And it's just like, and I will say I'm thankful. I haven't really had a problem with that in our church here, but I have experienced that kind of thing before, and it's really frustrating when people do that. And it's hard on the kids too if they find out, they're getting critiqued and under a microscope. It just kind of makes you want to rebel. If everybody's looking at you waiting for you to fail. And I do appreciate the fact that I feel like in our church everybody's wanting our kids to succeed. Right. And that helps. That helps a lot, knowing people are cheering you on and not, rooting for your failure.
And let me throw this disclaimer out there. Mm-hmm. Anything that I've said wasn't necessarily directed at our church. Mm-hmm. Okay, but I've seen this, and I've also talked to other pastors.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I've heard horror stories of things that pastors' wives have dealt with, pastors' kids have dealt with, and I've seen it with people I know, and it's heartbreaking. I've seen pastors' kids deal with some stuff where I was just like, I don't know how that kid's gonna make it. If I had to put up with that probably would have messed me up. If my kids had to put up with that probably messed my kids up. Yeah. And so, just understand, you are putting your family kind of in the crossfire, when you get in that battle, because they're there with you. And but again, God can protect them. At the end of the day, you're not going to be better off running from God's will for your life. But I think the key is just being in God's will. And if God's will is, having being in the crossfire, you're safe there, but just never forget about your dependence on God's protection and staying close to God, because you're going to need him through all of it. And he can protect them.
And if you have problems, get those fixed before you go into the ministry.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Don't get them fixed.
The ministry won't fix the problems.
Right. Get them fixed and addressed and different things. And if you cannot fix them before you get in the ministry, don't go in the ministry. Mm-hmm. If you have marital problems right now, chances are you don't need to go in the ministry until those marital problems are fixed.
Yes.
You really don't. Because going into the ministry, it's not going to make them better. It's actually going to make them worse.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because the stress and challenges just enhance a lot of those problems. Mm-hmm. And again, we've talked about a lot of these different battles and things that you have to fight. If you can't be fighting at home, I'm thankful, so I've had, kind of a rough couple weeks, pastoring, but one of the things that kind of helped me get through a lot of this was, I was really glad when a lot of battles was going on and things were happening. I was able to go to my house and see what was going on with my kids, specifically things going on in the lives of my older kids. Mm-hmm. And it's like going very well. And it's just like, I was able to take great comfort in that, no matter, because that is the priority. Mm-hmm. And I would rather have a battle here, I'd rather have a dumpster fire here and things going great at home than a dumpster fire at home, things going great here. Because, again, if I got a dumpster fire at home, I probably shouldn't even be here, you know? So even if it's going good on the surface, I'm probably a fraud, for even being here, So, I am thankful for that. And so, just understand you are asking a lot from your wife and from your kids. And that's okay. I think they can handle it too. But as a pastor, and as a husband, as a father, I think you need to recognize that and, let them know that what they're dealing with.
Right.
And they didn't ask for it. My kids didn't ask for it. They were born into it. Mm-hmm. And I was the same way too. I didn't ask for it. I was born into it. And at the end of the day, how you take it, it depends on how you look at it too. And I will say, recently I was with all my family, all my sisters were there. We were all together, and pretty much, all my three of my sisters' husbands are pastors. The other one, they're in church, but they're all of my family is heavily involved in church. And sometimes we just like to sit around and complain and talk about challenges and all that kind of stuff. But and we're kind of joking with each other, but we were all just kind of like, what in the world are we all doing in the ministry? We grew up in a pastor's home. We knew what it was like. What were we thinking? It's like, and while we're kind of saying that, joking, we are there because at the end of the day, we were a happy family, and we were very blessed. God was very good to us, and and we all, we're all on our first marriages. We all have the Lord has blessed our families with kids and health and. All these things. And yeah, there's challenges that are there, but it is worth it. But I think a lot of people are just unaware, and it's almost like they're blindsided when these things come. And they're going to come. You're going to get creamed. But, it's worth it.
And there's always people out there, too. And listen, you got to have thick skin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You have to have thick skin, and you got to teach your kids to have thick skin. And that doesn't mean so thick skin that your heart's not tender. I always say tough on the outside, tender on the inside. Mm-hmm. But you have to have, because people are going to talk about you. People are going to call you names. People are going to attempt to stab you in the back. These are different things. But aside of all the things that you deal with as a family, it's very rewarding, Brother McMurtry. It's very rewarding when you see somebody that you have invested in, you fought for. You brought them. I mean, you led them to Christ, and you discipled them, and you were there to catch their tears. You were there to take the broken pieces, put them back together. You spent all of that time. It's always very rewarding to see the end where they're at, where they're serving God, they're faithful in church, they're soul winning, they're discipling other people, they're helping other people. That's the reward that comes forth from that. I don't know how many times I've seen that happen. And it's been a lot. But it's not near as much as what it could be. Mm-hmm. Then you have the heartache, but there's also the reward.
Yeah.
And the ultimate reward, obviously, is when we go to heaven and we stand before our Savior. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we see those lives that we have affected.
Yeah. And you have to think about that a lot. But yeah, I agree about the thick skin, and to make a carnal reference that probably a lot of people won't get, but some of you might get it. But I get my feelings hurt a lot, but fortunately, my feelings regenerate twice the speed of normal men. You might not be familiar with that, but it's a funny statement I heard one time, and I like to use sometimes.
Twice the speed of normal man.
Yeah, my feelings regenerate twice the speed of normal man.
Okay.
Yeah, I stole that from a TV show. It's kind of carnal, but
It sounded like a superhero reference. A reference like.
It's not, not a superhero, but it sounds like something the superhero would say.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
You got regeneration.
I like to steal that. Some of you all will get that reference, and it's because you're carnal. And so I won't mention on the program because we're trying to be spiritual right now. but I had to say that after you mentioned the things, because it is true. You do have to learn how to get your feelings to regenerate twice the speed of normal man. And so yeah. But anyway, well, this has been good. We need to shut it down. But yeah, I wanted to have this conversation because, again, you've been in the ministry a long time. You know what it's like. And I just thought, I probably should have a few discussions like this, just talking with different pastors where we just kind of talk about just reality of it. And it is. Mm-hmm. It is worth it. It's if I had to do it over again, I would do it over again. But it's not without some real challenges. And I feel like a lot of people are getting started in this thing, and then when they find out what it's like,
I didn't expect this.
This isn't what I signed up for. Well, it's like, interestingly enough, I kind of knew I was signing up for it.
Right.
I grew up in a pastor's home. I knew what it was like, and sometimes I ask myself, like I said, what was I thinking? I knew this is what it is, but again, it's at the end of the day, it's about the heavenly. And I believe what the Bible says. I don't believe we've given up anything. We're going to be, given, much more. There's a millennial kingdom that's coming, and there's heavenly rewards that we're going to get. And you just got to stay focused on those things. And I'm glad I've chosen to pursue the spiritual things over the carnal things. They're only temporary. And even though I have tried to devote my life to the spiritual things, the Lord has blessed me in carnal things. I'm not starving, and I enjoy my life, and I've got a lot to be thankful for. And so, but anyway, well, hey, I appreciate everyone watching. Appreciate you, Pastor Griggs. Any final words before we shut this down?
Nope.
All right, then. Well, I thank you all for watching, and we will hopefully get some more conversations with pastors coming up real soon. But either way, we will see you all next time. God bless.